Music Not Diving is brought to you by Acid. Head over to ac55id.com to check out the fastest growing electronic music marketplace. Whether you're buying music, selling music, listening to music, this is the place for you. 1 cent per stream is the payback rate over there, and that also applies to podcasts. So if you're watching this over on ac55id.com, then we're getting paid. So thank you for that. As a label, they charge you 0% commission. There is a monthly fee, but as a viewer of Music Not Diving, they are waiving that for the first 6 months. So if you use the code SCUBA6 when you sign up, then the first 6 months are free. Absolutely free. That's pretty great, isn't it? So head over to ac55id.com to check them out.
This is Music Not Diving with Scuba.
Welcome to the show. I'm Scuba. This is Music Not Diving. We are a music podcast. The clue is in the name. We don't always have musicians on though. We have, people from around the music industry, not always directly involved in making music. So we've had, club promoters, PRs, managers, booking agents. And we have also had previously a therapist, someone who specialises in mental health with regards to the music industry. And we have someone else from that area this week. So Denise Devenish is a psychotherapist by trade, but she is highly knowledgeable in the whole spectrum, across the whole spectrum of mental health issues, and particularly concerning musicians. So she is specialising in treating people who work in the music industry and peripheral activities, I suppose. But yeah, I think it's fair to say that she focuses very specifically on music because she has a musical background herself. She was trained as a singer. She had a nascent music career which nearly turned into a full music career, but took the decision to go into therapy instead. She is, in fact, the daughter of someone who has been on the show previously, Adrian Sherwood. Now, she was quite reluctant to admit that, but when I discovered it, you've got to point that out, right? So, yeah, Adrian was a guest on the audio-only version of this podcast, the previous version, the Not a Diving podcast. So we'll put a link in the show notes if you want to go back and listen to that. That's not directly relevant to what we're talking about today because this week's conversation is very much about mental health. It's about the problems that people face in music. It's about the way they can get better, the treatments available to them, and all of the things around this topic, which is sometimes talked about, sometimes in a positive way, sometimes in quite a negative way still. And all of those things are covered in what is a really, really interesting hour or so with Denise Devenish. So let's just get into it, shall we? Just before we do that, though, a reminder that you can support the show on Patreon, patreon.com/ScubaOfficial. There are 2 very reasonably priced tiers there, the most expensive of which gets you all of the music that we release on Hot Flush Recordings and affiliated labels, but they both get you bonus content. And every 2 weeks, I'm doing an audio-only bonus podcast where I talk about an issue that's affecting the music industry right now. So that's a great way to support the show. You could also, though, just like this video, subscribe to the channel, and get involved any way you can. It all helps. It really does. So without further delay, let's head over to the studio and talk to Denise Devenish.
Brought to you by AC55ID.
Denise Devenish, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
How you doing?
I'm good. I'm hot.
Yeah.
Not complaining. We must
This is the new studio. This is the first time we've recorded in the new studio.
This is great.
Yeah, just to draw the curtain back, it is quite hot in here. So if I look hot and it looks hot, it's because it is hot. So why don't you introduce yourself to the audience? I don't always do this, but I think in this case it might be useful. So
okay.
Tell us
what I am, who I am. Yeah, I am, my name's Denise Devenish. I am a humanistic, person-centered counsellor. I'm a therapist. Mm-hmm. And I run my own private practice working exclusively with musicians and those working across the industry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's really why I'm here.
So we've had a therapist on before a couple of years ago, Tamsin Embleton, who wrote a book about mental health and touring specifically.
Yes.
So how does your approach differ to hers? But let's talk about in more general terms about therapy and how this works within, or how it's useful for musicians and people working in the music industry. So talk a little bit more about what you do specifically and how it relates to music.
Yeah. So, Well, I think Tamsin's a psychotherapist, and that's kind of what we're going to speak about later a bit. So there's a different philosophy and approach in the way that I work fundamentally. And actually, I think the way that I work, but we'll get into that later, works really well with musicians and creatives, because musicians and people working across the industry need a space to talk and be heard and share about how tough it is. Because I think generally there's an idea that it's not a real job, that it's kind of, oh, you're doing you're in music,
right?
Lucky you, or that's fun. And of course there is that. But there are lots of parts to it that are incredibly stressful. And I can name, those parts. And I think that because of my upbringing, I saw firsthand, I toured a bit too, I do sing, and I qualified, and I was like, let me just go and see what's out there for musicians. And I found Help Musicians UK, that are brilliant charity helping to support musicians. And I was like, okay, it's a bit of a thing, but not enough of a thing.
Yeah.
So I set it up, and within a month, I was full. And
so when was that?
7 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think since then, actually, in time I've been working, the conversation has got bigger. It's become more of a thing. It's an established thing that the musician's life, or people working in the industry, it's not a walk in the park. It's a lot of fun, but it's tough. And we've watched artists that we love die in front of us, and there's lots of questions as to why. And it's been glamorized and glorified, the kind of suffering of the artist. And I'm very much out there saying, no. Why is it cool or funny almost, or kind of really exciting when a musician and an artist is sick?
Yeah.
Because that's what it is. They're sick.
Well, this is the trope, right? The trope of the mad artist, not just musicians, but anyone seemingly who is creative in quotation marks, is supposed to have this underlying trait that they're not normal, right? And I suppose to some degree, people want to romanticize the fact that those people are different, and they're capable of these different things, these almost kind of superhuman things that people, I suppose, aspire to themselves. Yeah. And it has acquired over time this kind of sort of legend, the legend of the mad artist, which is in itself probably to some degree, I suppose, self-fulfilling, because I was thinking about this as I was preparing this conversation, the degree to which these kind of tropes acquire a kind of momentum of their own. But yeah, talk a bit about how, what are the specific things that people in music, because it's not just musicians, it's also people living
across the creative industries.
Exactly, yeah.
Totally. And I think I'm quite interested in just the creative mindset and creativity and what happens in the process of making, but also the industry and how the industry supports or perhaps contributes to the fact that over 80% of musicians are struggling with anxiety and depression. And it's a crisis. So the kinds of issues that came up in the research and that totally are echoed in my practice and that I see all the time are insecurity, self-doubt. So it seems to follow success. So if you're doing well, or you've got a show, or you've got a block of work, you're okay. You're on a tour. As Tamsin, I'm sure, has spoken about, you're in a group. There's that camaraderie, that family. You're on a job, brilliant. It's the times in between, which fluctuate, and you're a freelancer essentially. So when you're not working, you don't feel your self-worth. You feel a shaky sense of self. You feel lost. I think that's what I'm seeing they feel. And then it's okay again once work comes back, or people start liking you, following you, saying nice things about you. But it's, for me, I'm really interested in the artist's self versus the personal self. It's very Gestalt there, the kind of parts work, right?
Right.
As in separating yourself into parts. And people have different ideas about this. In my work, I'm very much saying to the people that I work with, I think it's healthy to be a parent, to be a partner, to be a son, a daughter, a sibling, to go and be a version of you that has nothing to do with music, has interests elsewhere, and then to step into music self, almost like a performance. Otherwise, your identity merges too much. And that's where you see really low self-worth, insecurity, anxiety, depression, because you can't make sense of who you are away from who you are when you're creating.
Sure.
And also the creative process, I can see for lots of people, can be very difficult. As much as people think, oh, you're making beats, you know, or oh, brilliant, you're going to go and write and record. It's a very personal, internal, you know, explorative process that can be very challenging. And lots of artists are talking about their real lived life experience, and then they're going on a stage, like, and playing to a load of people who might not recognize what it's taken, or the sacredness of what that involves. And for me, you know, it's, for me, the rave, being in shows it was always very ritualistic, right? I didn't realize it when I was a kid. You had Emma Marshall on, he's brilliant.
Yeah.
Right.
She talked about this in a very persuasive way, actually. Yeah.
I always felt that I got really into looking to shamanism. I was raving really young. I didn't like the hedonism. Well, I did, but I mean, it was a problem, right?
Right.
It was a problem.
I mean, it can be a problem. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people,
it can be.
Yeah, people have different experiences.
Different experiences. But in the music industry, again, substance misuse is a massive issue. I think it's changing now. I think young people are doing less drugs and they're more addicted to their phones, and they're more obsessed with how they're being perceived online. Comparison is an issue. Boundaries. I think there's a real issue with boundaries, because you end up working with your mates a lot in music. You know, you're hanging out with people and like, let's try a project.
Sure.
And so there probably wasn't a contract involved in that.
Right.
If you suddenly get somewhere with some success, you kind of stumble into it. And lots of musicians are figuring out along the way how to place boundaries so that people are getting paid properly, figuring out who's got what cut and what, you know, and then suddenly your friendship is challenged, strained. So I see that a lot. A lack of boundaries, a lack of not being able to stop working, like a 24/7 mentality, because you're meant to be hungry for it. And to get anywhere in music, you've got to go all the time.
Yeah.
So that causes people to burn out and become exhausted. And listen, the thing is, even musicians and those working in the industry don't even want to name that they're struggling. Because if you're on a tour, if you're getting somewhere and you start moaning...
Yeah. I mean, it's like...
You're meant to be hardcore. You're not meant to be
The acknowledgement of weakness is a real kind of... Yeah, it is a taboo kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it still is, absolutely still is, even though there have been, you know, I mean, pretty high profile in some respects, or some instances, high profile, you know, people coming out and being quite open about it. It is absolutely still quite a macho culture.
Yeah.
So you mentioned research. So I've been reading Can Music Make You Sick by Sally Ann Gross and George Musgrave, aka Context, which is fascinating piece of work, I have to say. I mean, it's pretty dense. I spent quite a lot of yesterday trying to wade my way through it. It is very interesting though, and it's you know, fully empirical research on all this stuff, and sort of digging into well, they kind of separate it out into work, value, and relationships, and a lot of what you covered there describes some of that stuff. I mean, work in particular, I think, is a really interesting one here, because, like you say, the notion of work in music is pretty nebulous, right? It doesn't really correspond to most people's jobs, and as you said, people don't really take you seriously when you say you work in music, but actually, people do work incredibly hard.
There's a lot of work involved.
Yeah.
And especially now.
Right.
Because you kind of got to be... I work with lots of musicians across the board. If you haven't got a label and you're doing it yourself, you've got to do everything. Also, you know, you're laughing because I think you know what's involved.
The reason that I laugh there is because I have like every middle-aged man, I have a WhatsApp group with like 3 of my closest friends, and the running joke since I've been doing this full time since 2007, so 18 years, and for 18 years the running joke has been like Paul does no work, basically, right? And me saying no, I work a lot harder than you, 9 to 5. No,
we're laughing, and you're laughing it off because you've kind of accepted that's. You're a part of it and you go with it.
It's reality, yeah.
So it's that kind of self-deprecating thing that's just sort of built in to being a musician. I see it all the time.
Sure.
And not just a musician, everyone working across,
Yeah, right. I mean...
I'm married to a great music manager. I've seen what's involved, but there's still this like, come on, mate. when they're at their jobs. And it's like, whoa, he went to bed at 1 because he had to wake up to speak to someone. Anyway, there are so many jobs involved. And you're right. I don't think generally people appreciate it. I'm giggling too because I grew up, everyone around me was in the music industry. My mum.
So your father is Adrian Sherwood, former guest on this show. So
we just discovered that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So he has a lot of direct experience in all of this.
Yeah, he's been in the music industry since he was 17. So it's whole life in music. And my house was a studio. It was his studio, and my mum ran the record label upstairs. So, and I must say from that's the music industry is so full of emotion, and it's so full of intense energy because the work is to create. And the work is to communicate, honestly, and that's what's so beautiful and openly.
And it's people trying to fulfill their dreams.
Yeah,
in the course of doing this work,
it's not. I see people. This is the other thing that people don't consider enough. When people choose music, they're not choosing an easy route.
No.
It's like it chooses them. I know that might sound a bit naff,
right?
But the people I work with, people are struggling financially, even who've had huge hits right now. The music is it's a different place to where it was when, I was a kid and the CDs were about, mm-hmm. I've watched it change, and with my family and the impact it had on my family. And I've also in my practice seen musicians, artists, people working across the industry depressed at the prospect of having to leave and do anything else because they don't know anything else and they love it. I mean, generally people who choose music love it. I'm sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. You wouldn't do it otherwise.
Right. So why do you say that? You wouldn't do it otherwise?
You wouldn't do it otherwise because it's hard.
Yes.
It's extremely hard. And there are incredible highs, but those highs, I think for most people are pretty sporadic.
Yeah.
Like if you do this for the entirety of a working life, you're lucky if you have any success at all for a start.
Yes. Yeah.
And even if you do have success, those moments of success only happen occasionally. And so the majority of your time is spent trying to make those moments of success happen, basically, which can be, it can be absolutely soul destroying.
Yes.
And actually, and I think, I've said before that I think really the key to surviving is learning to some degree enjoy that kind of process of chipping away at the coalface, as it were.
Yeah.
And trying, if not to, really relish it, just accept it for what it is and try and enjoy the good bits as they come along, and then be in a position to, when the really good bits happen, really appreciate them for what they are. But that's absolutely easier said than done, Yeah,
and like you said, some people don't get to those good bits.
Yeah, a lot of people don't.
And I've seen people, sorry to be heavy, suicidal in that because
Absolutely.
They put all their money in, all their time, missed weddings, not had long-term relations. I mean, the sacrifice is huge. The compromise is huge. And I'm here to totally say to all musicians, everyone working across the industry, what you do is hard. Get help, get support. There is support available, and that thing, what I said about the self-worth, the kind of crushing part when you're so invested in your project and it's just not connecting, or you're sure it might be going somewhere and then it's dropped. And those highs, there's lots of lows. And just on a physical level, I'm sure Tamden spoke, the kind of the being on tour right now, often people are losing money. Financially, people are really struggling in the industry. So also you're working yourself to the ground. You're putting everything in it emotionally. And then you're not getting paid properly. And then sometimes the project has a little moment, or you think this is it.
Right.
It's connected to all these really cool people. Nothing on Spotify or whatever. And it's so deflating. And you're saying, you have to get used to, as a creative, for sure, failing, and being resilient is necessary. But as a therapist, obviously, I'm not saying rely on resilience, because I think denial is very unhealthy. So I think resilience, meaning, yes, to embrace that, embrace things aren't going to work out. And it doesn't mean that you're a failure. It doesn't mean that you're not good at what you do. But that's very hard to separate. And you're constantly seeking external validation, constantly with a creative project. So as much as I could say to someone, create for yourself, they're like, but I'm in it now. I want other people to love and like what I do. I want to be gigging. I want to tour. I want people to hear what I've made because I want to heal people. I want to connect to people. And it can sound egotistical. There's a lot of judgment that musicians or artists are so indulgent and self-obsessed. And when you get your heart broken, when you're struggling, when there's grief, when life isn't working out, and it won't work out for everyone, you turn to the arts. So why is there such a judgment and a kind of, I don't know, why isn't there more respect for what creatives do?
Sure.
Yeah.
So another trope is you have to suffer to make good art one.
Yeah.
Which...
Yeah, of course, there was some truth in it, but...
Yeah, well, that was my question, right? Because as we've been kind of implying in this previous few minutes, suffering is a big part of the creative process itself. But that is also a destructive trope. So can you talk a bit about that, please? Yeah,
I've had a few heated conversations about this with other people, and who are doing research, and I get that suffering. A lot of art is communicating about the things that are hard, which is why it's so valuable, because you can go and have really tough conversations politically, spiritually, personally in an artistic space. And it has the power to name things where you can't in other spaces. So of course it speaks to suffering. And when you're creating, it might be hard because you're drawing on difficult experiences, and so they're alive again, and they might be alive again every time you perform. Of course, I understand that. That's simple. It's a given. Makes sense.
Yep.
However, if there isn't some kind of practice or mindfulness around what's happening to you when you create, or what's happening to you when you perform, and then you just carry on and you spill into your evening, you go back to the hotel, and you don't end it, and you don't acknowledge what's happening, then you can become depressed working and confused between what is the art and what is you. Right. Because you can create, I think, despite your own suffering. You can separate yourself from it, and actually I think you need to create really well.
I mean, it's such a paradox, isn't it, being on stage and expressing these emotions of, really intense difficulty sometimes.
Yeah.
Right. But in a highly euphoric setting, right? Because I mean, there's not many better things than being on a stage and having thousands of people kind of looking on you adoringly. I mean, just at a very base level, it is there are not many better experiences than that, actually. But that is a very difficult kind of. There's a massive push and pull there, right?
Yes, yeah,
absolutely. And as I was saying, I was thinking about I don't know if you've seen there's a episode of Song Exploder, the video version of Song Exploder on Netflix, which is centered on Hurt by 9 Inch Nails.
Yeah.
And which is a real, it's a kind of really emotional piece of work. And he talks about it in detail, and just harrowing. And then it's like every 9 Inch Nails show finishes with that song. So you can imagine just a psychological, I mean, obviously, that's such a good example, because you've gone through this huge adrenaline, but also the cortisol, everything's there. And then this dopamine hit of, being in front of everyone, and you're connecting. And then at the same time, whilst you're getting all that from the audience, you're going in at the same time and performing. Yeah, right.
Getting a rush of talking about your trauma.
Yeah.
And then you come off the stage, and I do work a lot with artists. Let's talk about what you want to do when you come off stage at a big show. And actually it's not just a warm up vocally. There's a mental health warm up, and there's a mental health warm down I've done, and I do with lots of artists.
Oh, that's interesting.
is very important to this, because before you go on, the thing is, the suffering is authentic. So you're not going on, you can't really pretend you're not the content of what you're performing.
Right.
But you can separate, you can speak to it. You know, I get into this with different people in different ways. People have rituals, they carry stuff up there with them that might make them feel safe, that might sometimes obviously you're putting on your outfit for stage, but I'll say, okay, psychologically put on your outfit for protection.
Right.
And go up there armored. And I know that's a paradox because you need to be open. But I said, you can communicate, you can talk about, you can speak to that place that's in the song that will allow the performance to be potent and powerful whilst protecting yourself, you know. And the more that I get into that with them, and whichever way, creative people are brilliant in therapy because they're able to open up in ways in response to what I might suggest or I'm curious about, because I would never see my analysis or my opinion above anybody else's.
Right.
Anyway, but yeah, so I suggest something and then they'll say, actually, I'd really like to wear purple tonight because it feels safe. Or I'm going to bring a picture of my grandma because who I was with her as a child is so different from who I am now as an artist. Or, I mean, it can be so random, but it comes from them. So they got a little package, like a little bag of tricks, and it's the warming up. When they come off, it's from about boundaries. Do you want to see label? Do you want to see friends? I definitely would suggest taking 20 minutes before you see anybody to come off the stage rather than beers, hype, see everyone get to the merch stand, like loads of people need to do now, you know, even if they've got huge followings, so they can see and speak to their fans. No. Before you do any of that, bring back yourself to yourself. You know, and everywhere you needed to go to connect, to deliver, claim it all back. Bring it back. What does that look like? Breathe. Return to your body. Because then you can go out, it's done. And some people don't want to let it go because that's where they're happiest.
Right.
Or that's where they feel the most seen, validated, and actually the personal stuff isn't that happy.
Right. I mean, that's kind of what I was going to ask. So what we described, is that different to getting into character per se? Because I mean, like the kind of the character that, as you mentioned, like there is often in performers there's the onstage person and the private person, as you say, and often the onstage person is seen as being that's the people that's the one people are interested in. Yeah. Right, that's the one people want to interact with. Like, is there talk more about that? And is getting into character a way? Is that a productive way of putting it, or is what you're talking about a bit different?
I also work a lot with actors, you know, and have done,
right.
And it's interesting when you talk about getting into a role, right? For a musician, a DJ, I think it is similar. I think the thing I'm always saying is you have to stay present to yourself enough to become the character who you need to be on that stage, which is again a paradox. Yeah. But I mean by that, you don't want to leave the stage. You know, sometimes you can leave your body. People can get through a performance and they weren't really there. And they quite enjoy it. I'm not saying there's a right or wrong way. Everyone's got a different persona, character, way of performing. But if we name them, if we establish that there are different parts to ourselves, we all have different parts. We're a version now. Sure. And then when I leave, I'm going to go and be another version. But I hope that within all versions, I'm taking care of myself. And authenticity for me is taking care of yourself. Authenticity for me, as spoken about a lot, is being, it's not about honesty, because sometimes honesty isn't appropriate in all situations.
Sure, yeah.
But being connected is key to yourself enough so that you don't abandon yourself to deliver. And a lot of people, a lot of DJs, a lot of artists might need to have a drink. Also in the creative space, that's quite common, get in a zone. So where are they going? And if we're very simple about mental health and well-being, you know, the building blocks, the basics are good sleep, eating and moving your body, right? They might sound basic, but they are fundamental. Musicians, when they're rushing about doing gigs, meeting up with someone at 10 at night, they forget all of that your sleep patterns are all over the place. You're eating random things whenever you can, when you remember to, probably having drinks, when you're socializing. So fundamentally, there's not a good base. There's not a good steady. And then you go on stage and you become, like you said, this larger than life character that everybody wants, but you must want you to be well and to be present. You mustn't abandon you or leave you and become the show and become the character, because your sense of self will be totally lost in who you are on stage, who you are when you talk to press, who you are when you're creating. There has to be another you, because those parts are not sustainable for a healthy person.
Sure.
I don't know how else to say it. I don't think it's very healthy.
No, it's not. I mean, the whole touring lifestyle is fundamentally bad. Can you talk a bit about, what we've been talking about is the context of someone who's successful.
Yeah.
Are there major differences between the kind of mental health problems that you observe as a therapist, between people who have very high levels of success and people who really struggle? Like, my intuition suggests that okay. Talk about that.
Yeah, no, of course there are differences because there's been more validation.
Right.
But then also when you get validation and then it comes and then you fall.
Yeah.
It's a harder fall, and then there's more pressure to come back to that point.
Right.
And if your second project doesn't do as well as your first project or your third, right. And so everybody, whether they're starting out, trying to get somewhere, have had a lot of success, are successful, feel insecure about how to keep it going. They might have more money in the bank, brilliant, but people want to keep creating and they want to keep making and they want to keep pushing for more. I think that in itself becomes quite addictive. And the seeking of praise, the seeking of being loved, the seeking of, making sense of who you are in the world through your music and through your creativity. So that's kind of the same. I guess one part has more validation, but then it's never enough. It's never enough.
No, you always want more. I mean, I'm reminded of the Roy Williams documentary, which is also on Netflix, which I thought that was such an effective portrayal.
Yeah, it was great
of all this stuff.
It's hard to watch at times as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But talk a bit more. Talk more about people who haven't had success. I mean, a lot of people are going to be watching this who are aspiring.
Yeah, for sure. I think. For sure. Yeah. So that's the space where you're kind of working multiple jobs and you're extra knackered because you're making money to fuel the dream at that point. And also though, you're really excited in a way you haven't got there's hope. Right, that's all beautiful.
Yeah.
Sorry,
It hasn't been extinguished yet. Yeah, exactly.
But there's fear and lots of self-doubt, and I think, like you said, you have to be okay with failing a lot and not being given the jobs, and be young people or wherever you're starting at. It's really important to have good self-talk and like practices where you can check in with yourself and say, all right, we're feeling a bit crap. This isn't getting anywhere. I just feel like giving up. Okay, that makes sense. But I just really fear that seeping into, because I've seen this with people starting out where they're not getting anywhere. They're going for quite a while, just wanting to give up, actually, just feeling very depressed, clinically depressed. Chronically anxious, drinking more, smoking, I don't know, whatever it is, they're eating more, being on social media more because this is not getting anywhere. And so again, bringing it back to the basics for everybody, which, I totally saw during COVID anyway, just what are you eating? Is there routine and structure? What are you doing that has nothing to do with music? Because also when people are starting out, they just, everything has to be the mission. Yeah. But if you're throwing yourself into something as much as you love and adore it, 100,000 million%, not sleeping properly, not eating properly, not doing any exercise, not seeing friends, cancelling appointments because you might get an opportunity, you become obsessive. When you become obsessive, your nervous system tends to be pretty stressed out because you can't rest. You're obsessed with the music commission. I see it all the time. I get it. I respect it.
Right.
But that hunger, you will burn out. People speak about burnout all the time. There's also so much neurodivergent people in the music industry. It's normal. We're on a spectrum. Creative people are. It's a gift. It's great. But also neurodivergent people burn out daily. Being around people, too much sensory overload. So then you might be hiding in the music too. So you have to be really aware of what you're seeking through your music practice and the mission. And ideally it's healthy. And what does that mean? It means that you're doing it for the love of it, but you're loving yourself within the process of pursuing it. Otherwise it will make you sick. And be careful to not allow it to seep into your sense of self-worth. Your self-worth has to come from somewhere else because it's a rough business.
Right.
And like you said, you will fail a lot. And if you're not robust, it will crush you. And I think that any young person going into the industry, also when they do start to get somewhere, I think mental health support should be built into the contracts. I think majors should be doing that. But anyway, we're going there again. But I hope that, speaks to, people who are going for it and really pushing for it. They can wear themselves out to the point where it can be really dangerous for their mental health and well-being. So be careful.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. So as you're saying that, the notion of value in music and the kind of the sort of yardsticks that things are judged by nowadays, which is covered in that book, came up in my mind. And obviously, the metrics of value now are so much more visible than they used to be. So, Instagram followers, TikTok, likes, Spotify plays, which is my particular, my least favorite of the lot of them, to be honest, because that's a direct judgment of your music itself. It's one thing, I'm big on Instagram, whatever. Lots of people can do that without necessarily being musically talented. But if when you listen to an album and you think it's brilliant, and you look at the Spotify stats and they're low, it impacts your judgment of the record.
It does,
in a way which I hate so much, and I catch myself doing it, and it really makes me angry. So talk about the value that people ascribe to efforts in this area and how they affect us all mentally. That's a big question. You want to give your opinions on that?
We're in the midst. We're in it. The industry's changed so much, and it has done, there's been, but I think right now, I mean, like you said, artists are getting signed, A&Rs, on TikTok.
Yeah.
And you're right, the measure of talent and the measure of what somebody's put in and what makes an artist is not in Spotify streams and it's not in Instagram likes. But your artists now are being forced to think in those spaces in terms of their value. And it annoys me too. And I just think to protect yourself, it's really, like I said, also people doing it who haven't had a success, they're doing it all themselves. So they have to run social media. They have to be checking for likes. They have to create their own posts. They have to think about content. And ideally, there's a separation from it if you can. I know it's again money, but have someone help, or book in if you can't have someone help, times that you're going to go onto those platforms and stay away from them because they're so addictive. Spotify, that's you're right. It's true. You observe your own judgment. If you think, wow, this artist's really cool, and you look them up and you think, well, they're streaming. No one's following. What's this? They must not be very good. And you have to. Yeah. We have to kind of be.
So I had this the other day. I played at a festival and didn't get the transport home. I walked back to my hotel with a bunch of people in the crowd and got chatting to a few people.
Right.
Some of whom had no idea who I was.
Yeah.
And they were like, "Oh, who are you? Let me look you up on Spotify." And immediately I'm just like, "Fuck, my Spotify numbers don't look that great at the moment. Do I want
Don't judge me by that.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
It was such a horrible realization. I was like, oh no, they're not great right now, and that is awful. Like, I mean, just having those visible metrics, I think probably more than anything else, that has, I mean, certainly with my own experience, that's made such a bad
no,
effect on me.
I hear you, and that's really hard, and I felt that because you're kind of there having a great time chatting to everyone, then you had like a panic moment of don't go on Spotify now, you know,
right? Because you have because but the flip side of it is because you're talking to someone from a position of status, right? Because you said, oh yeah, I played the festival, so yeah, I'm look at me, and but then which makes your previous status seem fake,
right?
So I mean,
because you're not worthy on there, it doesn't look real on there,
exactly. So suddenly you're a fraud.
Yeah, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah. By having a drink, and in particular instance,
because basically horrible feelings came up, right?
Yeah,
and we managed the feelings with the food and the drink, and because you suddenly was like, oh, we're having a lovely chat. I've just told you I've done the festival, and now you're trying to quantify how successful I am, and you want to check how cool I am because I'm in the crowd with you.
Exactly.
Oh, you've only got.
Yeah, right.
I don't know, and maybe
That's exactly it. Yeah.
And then the funny thing is that you know the success you've had compared to someone who's starting out, they'll be like, I wish I had what you had. So it's also that thing of constantly basically being able to measure yourself against your own sense of value and worth. But in the music industry, that is really hard because it's built in to constantly be asking everybody else to value you.
It's so difficult to remember that literally everyone in the music industry has got someone above them.
Yes.
Like maybe Paul McCartney doesn't, maybe, but even he's probably got like, you know, he probably wants...
Depends how you...
He probably wishes he was Little Richard or whoever. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, so literally almost without exception, or probably without exception, there is someone that you're looking up to and wishing,
without exception,
and wishing you were that.
Yeah, and you'll never be what they are, so therefore you'll never be enough.
Right, exactly. And everyone has that.
Everyone has that.
And remembering that is so difficult to do, but so actually quite valuable.
But very important. Yeah. Because then so many musicians feel isolated. Musicians, you know, you in that moment, it's like, oh shit, you were part of the crowd. Your status was like, oh, this is kind of cool. That, you know, they know that I'm here. It's nice. You get a bit of dopamine from it. It's kind of cool, right? They want to connect to you. Then immediately launched into anxiety.
Yeah, right.
And fear of judgment. And actually, Spotify, anyway, how does an artist get loads of streams in Spotify?
Yeah, well, that's another story. Exactly.
And the algorithm's an interesting one. And sometimes things blow up and you're like, wow, how did that happen? And their playlists, they control who get put on the play. Anyway, I don't have to start judging the entity that is Spotify, but it pisses me off too. And what we're talking about is measuring your self-worth when those external factors are always there, testing you, probing you, pushing you. Yeah, but are you good enough? But, you know, they've got that. And competition is awful because you start to compete with your peers. You don't want to. And you're like, we came up at the same time together. Or you think, what I'm doing is just as good as you. How come you've got, you know, thousands more followers than me or 1,000 more streams than me? And you start to feel in competition. That's another big issue. And, you know, you really want to stay connected for your mental health and well-being. You want to feel that you belong and you want to feel that you're a part of a community.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Totally. Talk a bit about drugs and alcohol. Is it really true that younger people aren't...
They're not doing them as much, no.
That's absolutely... Because people would say that, and I'm always like, really?
Yes, it's true. I've worked... Right. Yeah, they're more in the gym. I've got... You know, I used to suggest about the healthy rider. It's a thing. They've got green juices and salads. There's no whiskey, you know, like in the good old days.
Wow.
To manage your difficult feelings. They might go for a run and do some yoga and, you know, they're looking buff. Because also... The thing is, now more than ever, you are being seen and you're in stories and you've got to share content. And I just think there's a shift. However, there is an addiction, an obsession with checking streams. Social media addiction is a thing. A lot of my work is managing obsessive thinking about how they're appearing on social media, obsessing why someone didn't share their post when they shared theirs. Why haven't they got more followers? How they're being perceived online, and they don't want to slip up anywhere. So being tipsy, being high is a bad look now, you know, whereas before it was a bit more glamorized and glorified if someone showed up really smashed and got on the stage and did something heroic and really cool.
Well, yes, I mean, like Deadmau5 is an example of this, isn't it? Because he did that recently, and I mean, and was not applauded for it at all, right? That was, I mean, that might have been something that might have been different 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah. So we're in a different time. Artists there's still drugs around. But if you think of how the music industry was in the 90s, you know, like we were saying, the glamorization of the suffering, there was so much glamorization of drug use and it kind of being cool. When actually we were watching people that were really, really suffering in the disease of addiction. Amy Winehouse is still such a tricky one there, you know, and you have to ask very difficult questions as to how did that happen? You know, the documentaries there and implying or blaming different people. But I think it's a really difficult, it's a lot of feelings. And I mean, mental health and emotional well-being is about feelings. It's about the management of addiction is about feelings. It's a feeling disease. Can't cope with so many feelings. So hence why there's addiction, even though it's changed more. Even though I think that the substance is changing, although it's still there, we're drinking drugs, the addiction is rife because musicians and people working in the industry are trying to manage very intense feelings, like that anxiety you felt in the crowd, wanting to be loved, rejection, praise, glory, adoration. They're nothing. You know, you're a superstar in a minute and then a loser somewhere else in your life, and you can't join it all together and make sense of who you are. So you use to cope. And I think being able to sit with yourself and have some kind of relationship with yourself, which is why I think therapy is useful depending on the approach. So it's coming from you. You are developing your sense of self, not based on how Spotify are treating you and how many followers you've got and how the industry is responding to you, but how you think about your work. How you think about how you treat people when you go to a gig, you know, the things that make you feel good about you. We all have to have that to stay well. And in music as an industry, it's very difficult, I think, to stay close to your sense of self and not get caught up in the thoughts and opinions of everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting observation, actually, that, you know, different eras and different music scenes have their own version of addiction. Yeah. Right. So, you know, thinking about the kind of classic kind of rock thing is heroin and cocaine, right? Yeah, and then obviously dance music, you know, ecstasy and you know, and kind of uppers were built deeply into
and the raves
into the whole culture. Yeah. And you know, so many people died in rock, I think, because it's easier to kill yourself with heroin. It just is. It's easier to, you know, take an overdose and die. Yeah. That's not quite the same with dance music drugs in terms of actually, you know, in terms of killing yourself with them. But yeah, obviously they're still extreme or can be extremely harmful. It's super interesting to hear that even in an era of people being quote unquote healthier, there is still this tendency to be addicted to stuff, as you say, with social media.
Yeah. And maybe death isn't kind of immediately obvious within all that, as in physically, you know, your heart's stopping as a result of engaging in your choice of drug. But social media addiction is psychologically so tormenting to the point where you'll become depressed and anxious very quickly and very removed from a sense of self because you're obsessed with what other people think constantly in your phone. You can't get off the phone, can't sleep, can't really be anywhere, you know, can't be present anywhere because you're always in this place of what's going on in my reality in there, which in itself, I think, you know, we're going to see the ramifications of kind of social media addiction a bit later. I think that's brewing. And then
because it is going to an alternative reality.
It is, right? Yeah. We don't want to get into
it. Is definitely analogous to drug taking in that way. It absolutely is, right?
Yeah, a whole other. Yes, absolutely. It's escapism, and it's a version of you in a fake world. I mean, it's in a world that isn't here. It's being, and everyone, your sense of self in that, similarly to taking drugs, can escape here, right? Yeah. So in therapy, very much what I'm doing, and very much in the way that I work, therapy for me is something, I'll be very honest, people, are skeptical of therapy, rightly so. And that's a whole other podcast for many reasons. People should be, because it's not a science, really.
Right.
Psychiatry is the medicating of the brain is.
Yeah.
But the rest
That's something
of it's
different, right?
It's something different. You
Let's talk about this.
Yeah.
What are the options for? So, say if you're, you figured you need some help.
Yeah.
What are the options available to people?
Yeah, that's a really important question.
Yeah.
Because so in music, there's Help Musicians UK. There's a free helpline and music support. Actually, brilliant. And sorry, I just need to shout out BAPAM as well on the Music Minds Matter project, because you can go and get 6 paid for sessions by the Music Minds Matter project if you work in music, and you can have some mentorship, and you can see a doctor at BAPAM, the British Association for Performing Arts Medicine, and get a lot of support, and they're brilliant. And I work with both those organisations as a mentor. So, great. But generally speaking, when you are struggling, it's really daunting. You go online and you think, I need help. And maybe, it's a really simple analogy, but with physical help, it only breaks their arm. Everyone can see it. Oh, you've broken your arm. And then you kind of understand the process, x-rays, it makes sense. If you start to feel odd, I want to start there, because also people don't always know. Am I just, to some degree, we feel a bit down. We feel a bit anxious. It's not normal, or it's not, it's in terms of mental health presentation, to be feeling anxious and down daily. If you're starting to feel disconnected from things that you enjoy, you're starting to not really feel yourself. If you're questioning, get help. Early intervention is key. Go and speak to somebody. Again, it's very complicated because there's a lot of stigma and there's a lot of judgment. Culturally, it depends on, your cultural heritage. It depends on if you're a man or a woman. There's lots of apprehension, judgment, fear, stigma. Okay. So when you go online and you type in mental health support, you'll see the counselling directory. Basically, what you don't really see without research is there are 3 different approaches. I'm going to simplify. So if I was in a room with a bunch of therapists, I'm going to say it out loud. I'm sure I'm not honouring and, naming all the complexities of what we all do, but I'm going to do this for the sake of all people seeking out therapy, which is the most important thing. In simple terms, there are 3 major distinctions. The first is the psychodynamic approach. The second is the humanistic approach. And the third is the solution-focused approach. And if you type those in, I think it's really useful. Have a little read, because you can get it really quickly now, ChatGPT. Just a download, and it will give you a general idea, but I'll explain it. Try not to be biased, because yes, I'm in the humanistic realm, but I respect all 3, studied all 3. So the psychodynamic realm, simply put, Freud sits at the center of it. It's more to do with early childhood and attachment.
Regular listeners will know that both my parents are psychoanalysts, so I have some skin in this game. But
you know a bit about this stuff.
That one. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
carry on.
And so Freudian, the psychotherapist, which is different to the psychoanalyst, by the way, because the psychoanalyst is just completely an analysis. The psychotherapist can work in the CBT realm, can work in the humanistic realm, but at the core is Freudian. Might be Kleinian, So analysts, right?
That's a can of worms.
It's a can of worms. Sorry, yeah. but because you mentioned, so analysts tend to Jungian, Freudian, they choose one way and they analyze from that perspective, because the therapist has to sit in their philosophy. They have to sit in their training and hold that space within from their training perspective. Anyway,
right, and it can be highly territorial. I've noticed, in a way which is probably not always particularly constructive, but sorry, carry on.
Well, anyway, yes. So the psychodynamic approach, if you're working with a psychotherapist, then I'm going to put this really simplistically, they are trained to be curious about your upbringing, your childhood, your past. This is very simplistic, and how your current situation has been influenced by then. So they will listen from your perspective, but they are analysing. They are curious about what they're hearing relative to the past and your attachment style, i.e. how you attached to your early caregivers, how that relationship shaped the way in which you relate to people in the world. So by unpicking that, unpacking that, exploring that, there can be more freedom in the present because you've relieved yourself from something that might be unconsciously or consciously holding you prisoner in the moment. Then the humanistic realm is very different. The humanistic realm, again, there are many strands within the humanistic realm, but in opposition to that, just differently to that, rather than being curious about the past and deliberately taking it to the past, the humanistic therapist is very much staying in the present, not allowing themselves to get into analysis. And that's their work. For me, as a person-centered humanistic therapist, I believe I cannot know more about a client than they know about themselves. However, my skill set is to create a space and to listen to them so acutely and to reflect back and to be curious so much so that they will come to understand themselves better. My analysis, I believe, can be detrimental because if I start to offer my analysis and they're vulnerable, I'm not judging, but my belief is then they might get attached to that. Mm-hmm. And I want to empower them to find their own way through, not to become dependent on my analysis. It's simplistic, I know, because I love Jung. I love Jung. I might train as a Jungian analyst at some point. Having said that, but the way that I work is humanistic.
Right.
I'm humanistic to the core and person-centered to the core. Then there is the solution focus. So the NHS has used a solution focus model mostly because it's the easiest to measure. I worked in the NHS for a bit. It's mind maps, looking at thought patterns and changing the thought patterns to get a result. Simply put, it's a little bit more surface-based because it's saying, let's find a solution, whereas the other two are a lot deeper. The other two are creating a space for somebody to encounter themselves and to ask themselves questions. And for me, the therapy space is very spiritual. So here is a bit too technical, and here is a bit too analytical, theoretical. Here is quite spiritual for me because you're sitting in a space with someone and allowing them to bring whatever they need and encountering them as they encounter themselves. And I think for artists and musicians, that's really cool because they're kind of doing that in the creative process. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. When we create, sometimes you connect into, it might sound a bit wanky, but the ether, something doesn't exist yet, right? Mm. You are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's a blank canvas for a minute.
That's the nature of creativity.
Right.
Anyway.
It is. We should be. It is. Yeah. Some people. Yeah. For me, that's the difference between an artist and somebody who, anyway, is coming in to try and get somewhere and doing something they think will work on Spotify. Mm-hmm. I'm not judging.
Oh, I'll judge hard on it.
But an artist is somebody who's willing to say something honestly, vulnerably, and truly. And that's why it takes great risk and involves, it's quite a bizarre process to create something that matters to you and that you're connecting to from nothing, and then watch it grow and then tweak it and ideally not destroy it before it's finished because there's so much of you in it that you're making sense of as you're creating it, as is person-centered therapy at best. So it's a very creative process for me, therapy. And I love it because I get to hold space for people in such an open and honest way. And I guess to some degree, the therapy space in that sense has always existed, maybe in the priest or the shaman,
right?
Where people have gone and seeked out to say things in safe spaces where they just need to liberate themselves from the thing they hold in their body. And mental health is very physical. For me, the body and the mind are completely, not for me, it's all in trauma therapy. But I think people say I see people online saying, a very simplistic view of therapy being just kind of regurgitating pain and what's the use. It's so much more than that. It's very much taking accountability and being willing to confront things that will create space for you to be a better person, a better partner. And obviously I endorse therapy.
Sure.
But I really understand why people are wary, and that's a whole other podcast, about the kind of history of mental health and the care systems that exist within it. It's they used to put people in cold baths and electrocute them not that long ago.
And recently, actually, yeah.
Being mixed was a sort of mental health disorder.
Right.
Anyway, so it's, that's a whole other podcast. But I'm very interested in that. And just the kind of cultural competence and the way in which all therapists need to be culturally competent in order to be practicing ethically in a way that is sound and safe for all people.
I've read something from you on that in detail, actually. Yeah, you talked about your own experience, and the reality that most people working in this area, most therapists, are white middle class people, basically, and how as you said, the necessity for them to be I don't know what the right word is. Well, culturally conscious is the term that you
culturally competent, conscious, willing to realize that however trained they are and however good their analysis or their expertise is irrelevant when it comes to sitting in front of an experience you have no idea about. And every time you sit in front of a person, you don't. So, you can be an expert in this field, but you must be an expert at getting yourself out of the way and listening. I don't care how trained and qualified you are.
Yeah, right.
In that sense, this is the work of being with people. It's always the work of being with people. And, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to ask is, what practical advice would you give people picking the right approach for them? Because it's a deeply personal thing. And it's not just the sort of the discipline or the kind of sector that you've just been describing. It's also getting the right therapist.
Yeah, totally. Right? Which can take a few.
It's hard, isn't it? So what practical advice would you give people? Because it can be quite daunting, like just getting this stuff started. And,
Well, also for low cost, what's a really good way of trialing therapy at low, sometimes free. So in the last year of training, we have to accumulate 200 hours with the public, and while you're accumulating those hours, you're qualified at that point, but you can see the public in your training institution for free or what people can afford. And I think that's a great way of trying therapy. If you're and there's also the Black Asian African Therapist Network for people that want to work with therapists who are very qualified but from those backgrounds. There's lots of these parts that should be considered, because there's the person you're working with, you need to feel safe with and you need to gel with. It's a relationship.
Yeah.
It needs to make sense for you. You don't want to be trialing loads when you're really struggling. It's quite an exhausting prospect to think I need to go and trial, 3-4 therapists. And
in that piece you talked about an experience you had with someone, I think, who you described as someone who was probably quite a good therapist, but just didn't work for you.
It wasn't the right match, and I didn't know that I could leave at that point. I thought therapy was meant to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think that's a common misconception, right?
Yeah, and I'm being healed here, so endure. For me, the healing process starts as soon as you feel relaxed and safe and at ease, and it's a paradox, but the process of therapy in that way it's not enjoyable. It can feel great to work through something and discover power that you didn't have, and to be emotionally present is a great feeling if you've been scared to be in your own body, or if you've not known how to manage big feelings. It's brilliant. It's really exciting to be in therapy and it's working, right? And my advice is that it must feel, even though it's challenging, safe and right. Don't stay in it if it doesn't feel right. Yeah. It must always feel right, because it's very it's very vulnerable work. So,
that's the thing, because it can be difficult often, but that the difficulty doesn't necessarily preclude it, but then it can quite easily be wrong.
It can be wrong.
That's a balance, right? There's got to be, you got to identify that yourself, I suppose.
But it's really hard, because people who are struggling with their mental health are vulnerable.
Right.
The concept of power is not one when you're fragile and you're really scared and you're shaking.
It's being a therapist, isn't it?
It is, and that's it. And you've got to. That's why, regardless of what any of us have studied, ultimately, and every great therapist knows this, you're holding somebody who's vulnerable, and it's good work, when it involves great care, and I think that the client must look for a therapist that makes sense to them. And if you look at those three modalities, if ever you type in psychodynamic, humanistic, solution focus, you'll get a really good idea of what speaks to you, I think, quite quickly, because they're all quite different. And if your therapist has those on their website, so if you look up a therapist and they say psychodynamic, then you've got a good idea about what they believe works for people, or humanistic. And some are integrative, which means they're a jack of all trades.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Any podcast listener will have heard of BetterHelp.
Yeah.
What's your opinion of that service? Okay. Okay.
I mean,
I don't know anything about it. I literally have no on my own.
This is where therapy could go. You could be speaking to an AI rather than paying a therapist. BetterHelp's at the beginning of that for me.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
I've heard about, I mean, the quality of therapists aren't great. It's like a fast track. I get it, because you want to just go online, pick a therapist, but it doesn't work like that. The quality,
And because I suppose like an argument in favour would be it's a way in for people, but then
for sure.
if the way in is a bad experience, then that's not productive, right?
No, and I hope, in the dawn of AI, that the arts and therapy will remain, because it's such a human. I don't know how. I mean, I'm sure you could speak to an AI and feel comforted and relieved, and the AI could do the job I'm doing and make you feel that it really gets you. But there's so much that happens in the therapy space that requires in-depth assessment. It does take time. It doesn't mean that you're not having help. As soon as you step in and you say, I need help, it's begun. But the BetterHelp just feels a bit of a kind of fast food therapy. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I respect it. I see that there's a need for it. I should probably try and train an AI. Might be out of business. I don't know. But I'd like to believe that the work of humans is needed in the arts and in therapy. And BetterHelp is it? No.
Right.
Not my friend in
Okay.
that. Not my friend in the pursuit for that.
That's unequivocal. Good. not sitting on the fence with that.
No.
Okay. Just to finish up, can you
God,
talk
I'm
a bit
sweating.
about? Yeah, it's hot. It is hot. Apologies.
No.
Yeah, just to finish up, can you talk a bit about how you got into all this and your kind of early experiences? Also your experience in music, actually, because obviously you are a music person.
Kind of, yeah, but I haven't got a big, if you're on my Spotify, I've got about 1,000 monthly listeners.
That's all right.
Don't check my
I'm not going to
Spotify.
judge you on that.
Don't check my Spotify. Yes, my dad is a record producer and my mum ran the label. So the house was a studio and a label office upstairs. So it was filled with musicians, artists, and music industry business people every day. I mean, it was a busy house, and I was very used to being around bass and drums. I mean, yeah, and when I was a teenager, I used to fall asleep with just things on loop while they were trying to figure stuff out. So I was immersed in it, and I'm really grateful. And I had a very unique, special upbringing. I think, and I got to tour a bit with Blur, and my dad was brilliant when I was very young, but I was struggling with my mental health, and I was using drink and drugs to manage. And I got asked to join a punk band called The Slits when I was very young.
Yeah, I read that. Wow.
Yeah, it was awesome. I was very close to Ari, may her soul rest in peace. And it was all too much. I couldn't cope, and I couldn't cope with the sound system thing. I'm quite a folky, gentle singer.
Okay.
And I was trying to get up and do and I was so nervous. I used to crumble on stage. Right. It's not for me. I don't have that hunger for it. I do stand by what I create for my mental health. I think the process of creating is so good for you when you don't have to do it for the business.
Oh, yeah.
It's really good for you. So I love that. I write, I paint, I draw, I sing. If I get to do a gig, wonderful, but it's not my bread and butter. I love that. I just help other people where it is, because when I was growing up, we did lose people. I mean, Ari, to cancer, but we lost a few people to substance misuse issues, and that was devastating. And they were kind of like uncles and people that were around. And as a child, it's a weird thing, because I think I knew there was some connection between their artistry and what killed them. Because I don't think the thing that I preach and that I live is they didn't have any boundaries. They didn't know how to end it. So they'd come out of the studio and I'd watch them carry on drinking. I mean, and then they'd go home and then they'd come back and they always looked unhappy, these people. They looked like they were really struggling with their mental health. And yes, they were brilliant musicians. They were incredible writers. I don't need to name them, but and really gorgeous souls. And I think that's an ongoing thing. I think, there are lots of really special people in music, and some of the most beautiful people I've ever met in my life work in music. And maybe some of the most beautiful people suffer the most. Maybe that is true. I'm just not willing to accept that that's part of what we buy into and glorify in the industry. Help them. You can be brilliant and struggle. Suffering is a part of life.
Sure.
But help is available. It might not come in the guise of a white psychotherapist, but it might come like me, or it might come like somebody suggesting working in a way where you can come off stage and it wouldn't be me, or you might be in a tour where it's different. It might be with people that you just blend well with in a way where you look after yourself on that tour rather than burn yourself to the point where you're depressed and not functioning. It might be taking up a hobby. My dad, he plays golf all the time, right? Yeah.
Okay.
He has to keep us. He's also got such a busy brain, he's such an originator in his sound. It's such a brilliant sound. And I think there are so many artists who are so original, who we're all fascinated by, right? Because they're so unique. These big Little Riches, these big characters. And of course, be that, and that's great. But have a part of you in life that's just watching the telly, or, plays golf, wants to sit and I don't know, play a board game. Just do something. There's nothing to do with being fascinating and an artist.
Just be boring sometimes.
Be boring.
Yeah.
When I was doing my existential model, she said to me, God, Denise, you can't be bored. It's very important to be bored.
Right.
It's important to slow down, basically, isn't it?
Yeah.
And allow yourself to enjoy the simplicity, and the music industry has nothing to do with any of that. It's full of amazing, exciting, intense energy, and we love it. But step away from it, take breaks. And we just lived it and breathed it. And I collapsed in it. I left. I didn't pursue a career in music, although everyone thought that was what I was going to do. I ended up working for 10 years with young people. And it was brilliant. It healed me. There's nothing like being in service to heal yourself and get out your own head. And then trained as a therapist and set up practice to go and save all those people I couldn't save, if you're going to analyze me.
Yeah, right. Amazing. Yeah. Okay, last question before we go. Thank you so much. This has been awesome.
Thank you. It's been great. Yes.
Yeah. Is there kind of like a nice, easy list, or, common, like your kind of number one or number two recommendations for people who are watching this and kind of are recognizing that maybe they're, not in a good place and, need something? Is there a kind of like first sentence that you say to people, or first few sentences?
Everybody is worthy of getting help. The earlier you get help, the better. There's lots of different types of help available. Don't give up hope, and don't give up hope on hope itself. There is always hope, and everyone deserves to feel peace and to be well, and support is always available. Seek it out until you find what's right for you, and get better if you're struggling.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Denise, thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Music, not diving, with Scuba.